Hi, good evening, everyone. Hello, welcome. My name is Wenyuan, and as a proud member for the TJ community, I'm honored to start this webinar and welcome you all. The title of this event is the importance of TJ for the growth in Northern Virginia. We have a group of exciting speakers tonight and also a group of proud sponsors. As the president for the Chinese American Parent Association for Fairfax County, which is one of the sponsors for this event, I'm honored to introduce the next sponsor. Peter, are you there? Peter Hamilton?
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Peter Lee Hamilton, and I'm the founder and chair of YAPAL. We here at YAPAL are so excited to be hosting this event tonight. This is a much needed conversation that specifically impacts our group, and we thank everyone for attending and giving their attention. YAPAL is an acronym which stands for Young Asian Pacific American Leaders. We are a national hybrid grassroots organization focused on empowering young Asian Pacific Americans and engaging established APA leaders. At the grasstops level, we bring together these APA leaders through our roundtable and webinar programming, which serves to support their work and encourage collaboration and mentorship. At the grassroots level, we bring together high school, college, and early career APA conservatives in order to provide them with both a social community and a professional networking space. We host weekly meetings where we bring in speakers, campaign for candidates like Young Kim, discuss relevant political topics like we are tonight, and provide access to resources like our internship and scholarship database and research library. You can check us out at our website, yapal.org, or Instagram at yapal1_. We're also on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you so much again for allowing us to co-host this event. We are very much looking forward to this incredibly important conversation. And I would now like to introduce Asra Nomani, co-founder of the Coalition for TJ.
Great. Thank you so much. We're so inspired to have young leaders like yourself joining us tonight because you are the future that we are all working so hard to protect. And so thank you. My name is Asra Nomani, and I am a parent at Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology. In June of 2020, there were 8 of us who came together wondering what was the future of TJ as we saw rumblings of change that were disturbing and troubling to us. We are all parents, many of us from overseas, many of us from here in the United States, but together, our numbers include roots in 30+ countries. We capture a diversity that is rich and beautiful. Today at the Coalition for TJ, we represent 8,000+ families, students, community members, alumni, and business leaders. So we have gone from 8 families to 8,000 because people care about the issues that we care about, and that is about increasing diversity at TJ and promoting excellence at this school that is now the #1 high school in the United States of America. We are the crown jewel of the US educational system, and we want to increase opportunities for all people while maintaining the standards of excellence that we all appreciate so much. We're honored to participate with so many distinguished speakers and co-sponsors for the event. You have an incredible leader in our community, both on education and policy, Chris Braunlich, who will moderate this important discussion. And we thank you, Chris, for your engagement and your years of service to the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Asra, and welcome to everyone. My name is Chris Braunlich. I'm president of the Thomas Jefferson Institute for Public Policy, an organization that has no relationship to Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology, other than we share the name of the man from Monticello. But TJ was a part of my life for the 8 years I spent on the Fairfax County School Board, and now 17 years later, those same issues are still with us. Organizers tonight have an ambitious program with 6 speakers in 60 minutes, so we're going to get right to it. But first, for those who are new to TJ issues, a short background. The issue of TJ admission has been controversial since its founding. The current process for TJ admission is a multi-step one for 8th graders dealing with a 3.0 GPA, enrollment in Algebra 1, an application fee, the TJ test, and a review of everything, including student recommendations, problem solving, and assessment percentile ranking. In an effort to ensure that TJ reflects the diversity of Fairfax County public schools, the community in Northern Virginia, Superintendent Scott Spraybrand has eliminated the current application tests, the application fees, the teacher recommendations, and the problem-solving essay. Dr. Braybrand has proposed requiring specific GPA, math requirements, and other criteria, and then selecting students for admission based on either a so-called merit lottery admissions or a hybrid admissions based on a student portrait sheet and other factors. Now, the school board has just announced that it will have a work session on Monday, December 7th, when it is expected they'll tell the superintendent which new admissions proposal it wants the superintendent to use. That's where the issue currently sits. Our goal this evening is to place on the table considerations that many are not considering and to help inform the public about the success of TJ and its contributions to Northern Virginia. We hope to offer a broad range of ideas in as short a time as possible, and to do that, instead of presentations, we've collected many of the questions the organizers have been hearing, hope to add your questions to them as well. Now, if you do have questions, I'll remind you to put them in the Q&A section, the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And I'd remind the participants that we're hoping to do answers in 2 minutes. So let's start with our version of the lightning round. Tom Davis, you were a former member of Congress, but you were on the Board of Supervisors when TJ was created by a school board that at that point was appointed. So you were there at the beginning. What was the mission of TJ as a Virginia governor's school? What was its inception, and what was the response in the Northern Virginia community to it?
Well, we saw Northern Virginia starting to emerge as a technology hub in the country, kind of rivaling Silicon Valley. I was general counsel for a company out of Tyson's called Advanced Technology. In fact, I incorporated the first foundation that raised money for Thomas Jefferson. But we saw this as an opportunity for a lot of smart kids to really take them to the next level that the public school system wasn't doing through its curriculum in the other high schools. We saw an opportunity to make a statement about Fairfax County and who we were on a national stage with this school. And finally, we saw this would be a magnet for talent. The people from around the country be attracted to come here to Northern Virginia, give their kids an opportunity to compete and come to TJ. But mostly, Chris, we forget this, it was about the kids. And if you remember, the original proposal was to co-locate it at Annandale High School. It wasn't going to get the kind of shrift we gave it later on by making, we even had a plebiscite in the Jefferson High School community to see if they would vote to close their high school and move TJ there as a magnet. And we had, it was a long, painful process. My kids ended up at Jeb Stuart High School, and a lot of the folks there were nervous about TJ coming up because they thought that this would skim the cream off of their schools. Of course, it's had the opposite effect. 2 of my kids went to Stuart and 1 went to TJ, and they all have gone on to successful careers and great colleges.
Thank you. Let me get back to the how you obtain the political will to get this done in a little bit, but let me move over to Vern Williams. Now, Vern has been the go-to teacher at Longfellow, or was the go-to teacher at Longfellow for a long time. Had the highest percentage of students getting into Thomas Jefferson, and he's retired now from Fairfax County Public Schools, but he's a little like Michael Corleone. Just when he thought he was out, we're pulling him back in. Vern, you taught gifted students for a long time. Are these just really smart kids, or is a gifted education something deeper? Why does gifted education matter to the future of Fairfax County and the future of Northern Virginia and the future of those kids?
Well, I had a long discussion with a student who was homeschooled, and he's working on a PhD in applied math. And he just gave me a telephone call today. And he said, the one reason that I wish I had gone to Thomas Jefferson instead of being homeschooled is the peer group. He said, I was able to associate with some of the best math minds in Northern Virginia in my age group, but it would have been so nice to be at the school and to associate with them in person much more than I did. He said, that's the one thing that I regretted. And so you have students who absolutely need a peer group who have a passion for highly intellectual stimulation. I have looked through math journals and have worked on problems that have challenged me to my intellectual limit to find out the next day that I barely challenged my gifted students with exactly the same problems at their age. So I think you need to have a peer group of those students, but you also need teachers who understand that they do learn differently. They go in depth more than most very successful adults could ever go in depth on any given subject, especially math and science. And you just slowly but surely learn that you don't just pull out a textbook and go from page 1 to 400, that these students love intellectual stimulation, anything that you can throw at them that challenges them. And I think Thomas Jefferson has fulfilled that for a lot of students, and I would absolutely hate to see that disappear.
I think you said it best to me in an earlier conversation. If a student's not willing to spend 2 hours solving a single question for homework, they may not be Jefferson material.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, the only way I survive teaching those students is that I love math. I will not spend 2 hours myself coming up with two problems for those students if I really didn't enjoy the struggle and the learning myself. So the same thing applies to them. When you go to a school like Thomas Jefferson and you're required to do the extra work and to take the extra intellectual leap, you have to have the intellectual stamina to do that, or it's not going to work.
Suresh Shenoy, you're a business leader, a philanthropist. You've been intimately involved in every aspect of the Northern Virginia community for many, many years, and you head the kind of company that hires TJ graduates. So let me ask, not every student attending TJ goes into a STEM career. Not every student attending TJ returns to Northern Virginia after they graduate. So explain to us, why is TJ important to the economic vibrancy of Northern Virginia? What role does it have as a catalyst for the Nova region and attracting and generating the best engineers and scientists and knowledge professionals in the world?
Thank you. I lived in Boston for 16 years, where I had my own business, and upon selling that business, I had some choices to make. And when we started looking at places that were that met our ideals and what we wanted to achieve, education was very high on the priority list. Both my kids were born in Boston, and when we moved to Washington, D.C., they were 4 and 7 in age. And I can sort of categorically state that most companies that we have come across and have moved to this region have done so after evaluating the education system as being a number 1 or number 2 priority for their employees when they look at a region to settle in. And when we looked at Fairfax County, there was no doubt that Thomas Jefferson stood out as the exemplar of a successful public-private partnership where industry and the community and the government got together and created an institution for gifted and talented students so they could excel in whatever they choose to pursue. So you don't start a school with the idea of having those kids stay in this region. You want them to go out and study, get educated in other schools of higher learning like the MITs or the Stanfords or even UVA. And then perhaps someday they come back, as my children have. My son came back after graduating from TJ, attending MIT and working at Procter & Gamble, then going to University of Chicago to get his master's. After almost 10 or 12 years after graduation from TJ, he's come back and he started his own business in McLean, Virginia. And in fact lives very close to where I live, and now has a fairly thriving startup business with about 20 or 30 employees. So, and that's not just one-off kind of a story. I know that at least 45% of the students from TJ eventually think about moving back to Fairfax County and bring jobs with them. They also enter government and do extremely well. When companies locate here, people such as Volkswagen and Airbus and large companies like Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin, they look at the same issues. How is the education system? Most recently, Amazon moved into our area, and most of the people who come here look at that. They had other choices. They could have moved to Atlanta, or Philadelphia, or New York, but they chose to move to Alexandria and Arlington, primarily because the education system in Fairfax County is so attractive. And Thomas Jefferson sets the bar for every other school in this region and perhaps in the nation from a science and technology curriculum perspective. So there's no doubt that Thomas Jefferson is so important to our region, for our economy, for our community, and setting the standards for the country. 60% of the students go on to UVA and Virginia Tech from Thomas Jefferson. So they are the largest, among the largest feeder schools to our colleges. And that is a very important consideration as well, because that has helped UVA and Virginia Tech to be among the top-notch, top 20 schools, public schools in the country. So I think, the school should not be treated like a petri dish for social reform, in my view. It is a school that was created with a vision and the ideas that our leaders like Tom, we are lucky to have him on this call, and to take decisions today that will impact the way in which we admit students to this school will have long-term effects. And it's not something where 5 years or 10 years from now, we look back and say, whoops, we made a mistake. Let's go back to the system. So I'll leave you at that. I think it's extremely important that we keep the status quo of having a way in which we can measure the way students perform in middle school, get them into a program that they can pursue, and prepare them for the higher education that is so richly deserved and needed by this country.
Thanks, and I think you touched on a really important point, which is the education here and the centralization of education up here in Northern Virginia. That is the reason why Amazon came. I mean, it wasn't for the traffic. It was because this is where the educated workers are, and where they, in turn, when they have children, can get their child a good education. Toussaint, Tyson, you're with the Black Student Fund, which has provided financial assistance and educational support for African-American students since 1964. So you have a long history of knowledge in this. You're the program director for the STEM program that offers that kind of support after school and on weekends. Let's stipulate for a minute that the demographic profile of students at Thomas Jefferson doesn't reflect the profile of the student community generally. What, in your opinion, is the best way to increase the number of underrepresented minority students at TJ?
There we go. I had to unmute. Let's start with something that, and I'm thinking about the test as I think about this statement. And it's something one of my professors told me when I was in school, which is there are no hard tests, there are no easy tests. There are tests that you are prepared for and tests that you are not. And one of the things the Black Student Fund learned early on in preparing our children for is that the students have to be prepared not only to matriculate through the school system, be it Sidwell Friends or Barnesville Day School, but we have to prepare them for when they go on to college. And that's the way that we've been thinking for decades. And we had grown concerned about the lack of underprivileged children getting into this U.S. STEM pipeline. And so what we decided to do was move a little bit from funding to actually providing the service of preparation. So we started with a coding program. We teach children Python and try to get them beyond being simple coders to trying to get them into being software developers, thinking of projects in a bigger sense than just coding. And we also picked up, starting this summer, we started with the math part of our program, where what we're trying to do is we're trying to pick students up from rising sixth graders all the way through school, all the way through high school. So we intend to start them with pre-algebra, algebra, algebra 2 and trig, geometry, calculus, so that by the time they get to, when they start applying to college, they are not underprepared. And it is our ambition that they will be able to pick their poison, whether they want to go to Rutgers or they want to go to MIT, it's their call. So the answer is, we believe, preparation. And more directly to your question, I think the answer is to pick the target schools and make sure that those children, from the time they are rising fifth graders until they take the exam to get into TJ, and then the summer before they go into TJ, that they are prepared by the time they get there. So that the test is not hard to them, it's simply a part of what they're doing. And another part of it is you have to recruit well. It goes back to what Vern said a little bit earlier. You have to target children who this is what they want to do. They play at games the way a lot of people play. They play at math the way a lot of people play basketball or play soccer. That's what you want. The kids, I see them all the time. They're kicking the little ball with their feet when they're doing nothing. They're just standing there kicking the ball with their feet. You want that. Those are the kids you have to target, in our opinion.
Yep, I agree. Norma Margulies, you're with Hispanics for STEM, which is an organization that's creating a bridge between graduates from the Indian Institute for Technology and low-income minority and students, and you're offering tutoring so they have a better chance at gaining admission to TJ. You've also proposed an alternative to the school board and the superintendent called Second Look. Can you spend a little time describing that proposal, and what kind of response have you gotten from the school system?
Well, thank you very much. I'm honored to be part of this panel. I have to clarify that is not my proposal, is the proposal submitted by the Coalition for TJ,
okay.
Which is, but it's, it's okay. It's a public document. It's on the website, and I would like to submit to the panel and to all the attendees and to the school board. I hope that they are listening to us. There is a way out of the crisis created by an illegal decision adopted by the school board, because according to the Virginia law, TJ is an academic year governance school. Consequently, it has to provide services for gifted students, and the gifted students have to be identified with a test, a norm, a standardized nationwide test. Consequently, the proposal of the Coalition for TJ is very smart. It says we're going to keep the test. We're going to administer the test the same way it has been administered. We're going to keep the same requirements, the GPA 3.0 that you mentioned on Algebra 1. But this is the genius of the proposal. We're going to give all the principals of the 26 middle schools, public schools, the chance to advocate for their students. If for one reason or the students don't perform well in the text, the principals can submit up to 5 semifinalists to the TJ admission office, and then decisions will be made. Of course, there's going to be a bump up in the score, so every student will have the average score obtained by those semifinalists who have passed the test, and then the final list will publish without any mentioning to the second look semifinalists. And subsequently, there has to be an essay writing where the semifinalists would answer a problem-solving question, of course, and they will be assessed in a holistic fashion, including, of course, assessing whether the economic background, the community service, etc. So I truly believe that the Coalition for TJ has an answer to address the situation, keeping the test without compromising the integrity of the admission process to this famous school, TJ, that we all love. Thank you.
Thank you. And it is a regulation. When you mentioned that to me this afternoon, I double checked, and it's still there, at least until enterprising people are going to get around to removing it to clear the way for what others want to do. Shame. Wenyuan Wu, you're executive director at Californians for Equal Rights and previously with the Asian American Coalition for Education. This issue that Thomas Jefferson High School is having is happening elsewhere with other selective high schools around the country, Philadelphia, Boston, San Francisco, Washington, D.C. What are you seeing in those cities? How are those parents reacting? And what is the reaction of the people that are making the decisions there?
Hi, good evening. Thank you for inviting me to this very timely event. And Chris, thank you for your excellent question. TJ is not alone. There has been a nationwide and very systematic attack on merit and equality of opportunities in K-12 education, especially in the gifted and talented programs, as well as in higher education. So for example, in 2016, in Montgomery, Maryland, the public school district's middle school magnet programs adopted a sweeping reform for the explicit purpose of making the racial mixes of these magnet programs mirror the demographics in the county. And this is illegal racial balancing. In New York City, the mayor, Bill de Blasio, and education chancellor introduced a series of racially motivated reforms to phase out academic selection, the standardized testing, which is known as SHSAT, that has facilitated the success of the city's world-class specialized high schools, and similar programs to replace merit and academic selection with racial balancing and identity politics are on the rise from coast to coast. For example, Lowell High School in San Francisco, gifted and talented programs in Howard, Maryland, the aggressive ethnic studies curriculum reform in California and elsewhere. So I see three general issues with such a systematic attack on merit and excellence. One, it penalizes hardworking students from the so-called overrepresented groups, many of whom come from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds. Two, it stigmatizes and backfires on the intended beneficiaries with issues such as academic mismatch. Three, in general, this is a race to the bottom that hurts our entire education system and international competitiveness. This is a politically convenient bandage which ignores the root causes behind the persistent racial achievement gap. So as a result, parents and concerned private citizens have risen up to challenge these attacks on equal education rights, merit, and standards across the country. In many cases, new immigrants of Asian descent are spearheading this movement to defend true equality. But we are not fighting for narrow self-interest. We're fighting for everyone and for what should be evidently true for the American creed, the American dream. Earlier this year, I participated in an impressive campaign in California that defeated a deep blue proposition in America's most populous and bluest state, which would have reinstituted preferential treatment and legalized government-sanctioned discrimination. I have two takeaways from our David versus Goliath battle. One, we're on the right side of the history. Two, we must promote our messages of morality and truth via national alliance building. In other words, we must mobilize across ethnic, racial, and geographic lines on this shared mission of equality under the law and push back divisive identity politics. So to conclude, the TJ case is not an isolated event, but a chain of events in the radical progressives' agenda to assault merit.
Well, on that thought, let me get back to Tom Davis in a second, but let me also remind everyone to put your questions into the Q&A section and into the Q&A section. Some of them appear to say answered, and I don't know why, but I think it's because I went in there and took a look at a couple of them. But please do that, and Ozma is going to review them and take a look. But Tom, at this point, you've been watching the TJ discussions a lot over the years. You were a member of Congress, member of the Board of Supervisors. I think you're the one who used the line that You retired undefeated and unindicted.
Good.
You were very successful at all of this. So you've been one of the top political figures. What advice would you give on the politics of this to the parents that are trying to preserve TJ for what it is?
Well, let me make a couple of comments. One of the things I've been doing since I left Congress, I've been the rector at George Mason University the last 6 years. And I'm a distinguished professor there, as well as a partner downtown law firm. And I've been part of a couple startups that have sold and part of a couple more now going on. So I've kept a busy life. One of the things we pride ourselves at George Mason is that our African-American, our Asian, our white, our Hispanic students all perform at the same level. Dropout rates the same, they all perform, but you know what? They all compete at the same level to get in. Everybody competes on an even basis, and we're one of the most diverse universities in the country. It's a real success story because everybody got there under the same auspices. I've also, many of you know, in Congress sponsored a bill that allows DC students to pay in-state tuition at out-of-state universities. This has had a direct impact on African-American students in the city and has tripled the number of kids from the public school system going on to universities. In fact, I'm a member of a foundation there and contributed $25,000 this year to help African-American students go to college that couldn't afford it otherwise, even with that help. So we've got a great commitment, but you've got to find the right match. One of the things we found is if you keep people, move them too far advanced from where they're able to handle it, sometimes can be very discouraging just along the way, and we find dropouts and the like. It's some hard-earned lessons as we try to find kids the right niche and help them be the best they can be and achieve their dreams. But mismatches are not the way to do it. The other thing I think, Chris, is you've got to start early. You can't just take somebody in 8th grade and try to equalize it. You've got to start before that. There are a lot of talented kids who just don't get the reinforcement at home that a lot of us do. And we've got to reach down into those areas. And a lot of these are in people who are economically disadvantaged, minority communities that traditionally have not had the same kind of help at home that some of the rest of us have. But they've got tremendous talent. They've got the brain power, but we need to reach down and tap that early on. But if you wait till the 8th grade, it's just too late. We need to do a better job of that in the public school system, of reaching out and getting these kids early so that they can not just compete, but can excel in life, because they've got the talent. But what they don't have basically is the home structure necessarily to provide them everything they need to get ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the success at George Mason, particularly with some lower income students. I remember when I was on the school board, they started a program to start early on and get kids started in 6th and 7th grade and be able to take them up through George Mason, through Northern Virginia Community College. Vern Williams, early preparation is something you're probably very familiar with, but let me ask you, and aside from that, is a test necessary component to identifying the students and the future leaders? There's a discussion of having a lottery. Can all of that be accomplished through a lottery, or do we need a test and some kind of testing?
I think that we do need a test, and they can come up with a test that does what they really want it to do. So you keep hearing that students can game the test, but if it's really problem-solving oriented, in other words, given a problem that you've never seen before, and you've never seen the type of problem before, and you have to figure out a method for solving the problem. Now, it may not take any more than 5th grade math as far as the application is concerned, but figuring out what piece of 4th or 5th grade math to use can be incredibly difficult if the test is structured correctly. So gifted students tend to have a way to figure out what they don't know. And that's why when the SATs were more of, well, it was less of an achievement test, and students, 7th graders would end up getting 800 on the math portion of the test without knowing half of the math, because they could just figure out on the spot what to do. Well, you can create a test like that. But I also want to get back to making sure that at an early age that students are exposed to serious curriculum. I think in the US, we have come to a point where if you're not high school, it should be fun and games and not really serious. And there are young students who are ready for serious curriculum. And I think Fairfax County and all public schools need to, at very young ages, have the students exposed to serious intellectual stimulation. And also you need the basics in order to do the cool stuff. So don't forego the basics. Don't throw them a calculator in third grade when they should be able to do math by hand, because if they understand how things work in our math system in third grade, they're going to end up doing amazing things when they get to the higher levels. So I agree that eighth grade is a little bit too late to start strengthening these students.
I'm going to follow up with you with a question, because I think you're the only teacher on the panel that I know of. We are in the middle of a pandemic. Kids, many kids haven't been back in a classroom since March of this year. If they have to be prepared, if they have to do serious work, how is this the time to go changing the rules when they've been out of the classroom for so long? And frankly, I'm a big advocate of virtual education, but I think you have to be ready for it. You have to be prepared for it, and you have to be the right person for it. Is this the time to make this kind of change in your opinion, as a teacher?
Absolutely not. The students and teachers are having a hard time with distance learning. So many things are thrown at both groups. And I feel like I'm having some success, but there's nothing more authentic than in-person teaching and learning. And to have all of these changes thrown upon you when a gigantic change starting last March has already been thrown upon us is almost cruelty.
Suresh Shenoy, you've been involved and engaged in TJ and the business community. And at one point, as Tom said, the business community really led the way in getting TJ started. It was a passion for them. Do you see that same kind of passion in the current business community in Northern Virginia? And if not, how do we get them back and engaged as strongly as they were?
Unfortunately, in my view, industry has lost sight of the importance of education. Once they have the people move into the area, they seem to sort of forget why they moved into this area and continue to support the education system as they should. Unfortunately, the dialogue has also shifted from excellence in education to creating social equity. And so we have to sort of figure out how to sort of separate the issue related to excellence in education from social equity. They are both very important. Now, if you really want to do this right, then you can't take a child in 8th grade and throw them at the deep end of a swimming pool and say, sink or swim. And that's exactly what we are trying to do by getting rid of the admissions process, by testing process, and see if the child is prepared to participate in a very advanced program. So there are things that we could do. If you really want to do provide social equity, let's start an immersion program in STEM education right in grade 1 in Section 3 schools, as an example, so that the children from a very young age understand and get excited about math and science and are prepared when they get to 8th grade to participate in an advanced program like the Thomas Jefferson. So I think industry needs to take a look at that and participate and partner with the school board to start these immersion programs where they are most needed, particularly in those areas where there's a fairly large majority of misrepresented communities at TJ. I don't see why we can't do that. We have Japanese immersion programs and French immersion programs. Why not have a STEM education program in these schools which need them and prepare the child? This is a longer term solution because there is no easy short term fix for what we are trying to do. And Fairfax County Public School Board's own report has said that a lot of things that they have tried have failed because they have not put the money where it should be directed towards early education. So I think industry needs to participate again, but perhaps not at the high school level, but at the elementary school level, and figure out how we can create these STEM education programs at a very young age, as Vern has so aptly also said. You know, children have to be excited about math and science. And even with TJ at the highest standards, United States finds itself not in the top 10 among the high school systems around the world. Even countries like Singapore and South Korea and Taiwan are ahead of us. So we need, this is absolutely the wrong time to make changes. You cannot create social equity by pulling down the educational excellence. That would be a mistake, a gross mistake that we will regret over the next generation, because they won't have the same opportunities that at least that we've had with TJ. So
Toussaint, and I'm going to ask if we can accelerate the answer, because I think there are a couple of questions piling up here and we really should get to them in fairness to the audience. But Toussaint, let me just ask, everyone has said the same thing you said. We need to start an earlier and more robust pipeline of students. Is there anything that you think public schools should be doing in building that pipeline that they're not doing, that you're seeing in your private program?
It's hard to say. I think it was Suresh who pointed out part of the problem is the home environment, and then Vern touched on something else, especially when you're talking about math. The teachers have to love math. Probably between those two things, so on the public school side, they have to bring in people, not simply people who are good in math. They have to love math and they have to enjoy teaching the math to somebody else. And when they see something of a math prodigy, even if he doesn't have the fundamentals, but he has a knack for math, you need teachers who can spot talent and want to nurture it.
Right.
The other thing, I think the taxpayers won't pay enough to do it. I think a lot of the effort has to come from private foundations and from business to assist the public schools with these enrichment programs.
Norma, would you agree with that? The Hispanics for STEM have a, in addition to just the socioeconomic issues, and there's a cultural issue for some Hispanic students. They are often English language learners. Is the school system doing a good job of helping them? And what are the things that you think ought to be done in the public schools and by your organization as well?
I'm afraid that Fairfax County Public School is not doing enough. They don't have a robust outreach program. Allow me to give you an example of Hispanics for STEM. We have already one family from Bolivia. We know that the mother doesn't speak English very fluently. I'm in contact with her constantly, asking about the assignments, how the son is working. So we are constantly supporting her, giving her the network, information she needs in order to provide the assistance to her son. So that's what is missing. And you could see in a recent paper published by Fairfax County, the first thing that they do when they have to do some adjustments to the budget, they cut the outreach specialist, which the outreach specialist is a key figure in all of this, because we have to build the bridge between the family, which is critical. If we don't get involved the family in the process, we are not going to have success. And the second thing that I would like to add is, which is critical, is that we have to be rigorous on the metrics. We need to provide clear benchmarks of how to assess the success of all of these STEM programs, of all of these outreach initiatives. We need to know where the money was invested and what is the product. How many kids, for instance, continue in the STEM field? How many kids, for instance, went to apply to TJ? It seems to me that outreach and rigor metrics is what is lacking in the approach of Fairfax County Public School. Thank you.
Thank you. Wenyuan, I came across this quote in the 1920s and 30s. The Yale Medical School dean gave very precise instructions to his admissions office. quote, never admit more than 5 Jews, take only 2 Italian Catholics, and take no blacks at all. This is not a numerical quota, except that the lottery would have quotas depending upon the region that you're residing in or being educated in. But does it have the same effect in your judgment, having looked at these issues nationwide?
Absolutely, absolutely. History is repeating itself. So I'm talking about the history of dividing Americans based on superfluous characteristics like skin color, ethnicity, gender, or national origin. Systematic anti-Asian discrimination in access to quality education is comparable to the discrimination suffered by Jewish Americans in the 20s and 30s. But the root problem here is not too many Jews or too many Asians or too many this or that. It is the dismal state of public K-8 education in underrepresented communities. And our national competitiveness, again, suffers as a result. So for example, among 71 countries surveyed in 2015 by the Pew Research Institute, the US ranked 38th in math, 25th in science, and 24th in reading literacy, which puts us behind most other developed countries. Test optional, dumbing down the standards, or dropping standards altogether is not the way to go. We need to reform K-12 and improve our underprivileged communities. We need better public schools, best practices, not political scapegoating, and we also need alternatives such as school choice or charter schools.
Thank you. Let's move to some of the questions that have lined up, and Azra, if it's all right with you, I'll start reading some of them as we move along, and I'm going to avoid reading statements from people, but except for Jim Dyke, who's a member of our board, but he's also a former Secretary of Education here in Virginia, and it was to remind folks that the original mission of TJ was not only to provide a gifted curriculum, but to serve as a model so that certain aspects of the program could be used in other schools to help expose all students to a quality education. The long-term goal was to prepare STEM students for entry into our workforce, and not just those enrolled at TJ. And I think that is pretty accurate, quite accurate. And he also made the point that, as others have, the starting point is not 8th grade. It's an elementary school. It's a lot earlier. So let me see if I can go through a couple of these and find some of them with question marks that haven't been answered. Rakesh has made the point, why is this being done in this year's admission? And another one said, not this year, please. Someone who's anonymous said they noticed a post on Facebook that a parent posted in which is posed by a teacher for their students to answer during asynchronous work, asking students to state their opinion on the TJ admissions, but contends that they only gave one side of the story. And I would just say to that anonymous person, if you find that post, there are people that I think would be interested in the coalition and seeing it, because one of the hallmarks of good teaching on civics issues has always been to present both sides. We have a lot of people commenting who could have been on the panel.
Yes.
Have you found, what is the new policy? What is the school board and politicians' take on this issue? I think we recited what the new policy is that's being proposed, which is to get rid of the existing TJ exam and replace it with some other indicators, and then you go do one of two things: either a very holistic sort of evaluation, eliminating teacher recommendations and some of the other things, and or moving to a lottery system that would be based on the regions. Is that correct, Azra?
Yeah, so that is correct. We've got a proposal that's called merit lottery, and then a hybrid proposal. But what's important about both of them is that they both involve eliminating the test.
Chris says, I would like to hear the panel's views, particularly Mr. Williams's, on how we could structure an admissions policy that could maintain its high standards, but without standardized tests. I believe Mr. Williams had some years ago submitted a letter to FCPS advocating a more holistic process that would not rely so much on standardized tests, but instead use an expanded admissions committee to do a detailed individualized review of each applicant to evaluate true passion and talent for STEM. This might be a viable middle ground that would allow the TJ community and the school board to come together around a process that would achieve diversity while still maintaining the school's high standards. I'd like to hear how practically such a process could be structured and what inputs would be needed for such a holistic review. So I will turn that question over to Vern in particular, and anybody else who wants to join in on the panel. Vern?
Yeah, I don't recall saying get rid of the tests totally, but maybe to de-emphasize it some, because at one time they were basically just giving out numbers. In other words, they would read teacher recommendations and they would just use a rubric, and a student would just get a number at the top of the teacher recommendation and the student information sheet. And it just seemed as though no one really knew the student or the applicant. They just read stuff and looked at a test score and just assigned numbers. And that's not the greatest thing either. So I think in addition to a real honest to goodness test, and like I said, I could make up one myself. And I'm sure there are companies that could do a stellar job on making up a real admissions test. But in addition to that, teacher recommendations, crucial. And also students should be able to not only list their accomplishments, but discuss their accomplishments. So it's a difference between, I was on my school's science Olympiad team, and coming to school maybe at 10 p.m., back when you could come to a school building at 10 p.m., and working with your friends half the night because you had a pure passion for science. You should be able to discuss and write about that also. And the teacher recommendations, as I said, are crucial. Middle school teachers, of course, I'm a bit prejudiced on that, having been one for over 40 years, but they are amazing. They know their students within those 2 short years. It's amazing how well they know their students. And they could write books about their students and what they've done in the classroom, outside of the classroom. I think that would be crucial. So having a problem-solving essay would be awesome. Having a test, having teacher recommendations, and having students discuss their accomplishments would be outstanding. I can't see the downside to that.
Anyone else want to join in on the panel? If not, there's a question from Marissa. What is going to happen to the peer group when different level of students are admitted to TJ? My son wanted to attend TJ because he wanted to be with similar peers for the first time in his academic life. And I know that I remember a student who ended up in the GT program at Twain Middle School, and I remember him telling me about a month or two into it that it was the first time in his life that other kids understood what he was talking about. And I think that is critically important to an awful lot of folks and an awful lot of kids, and they deserve that kind of opportunity. A lot of things coming in the chat room, which we weren't really monitoring. Ezra, I hope we're keeping copies of all this, because there's an awful lot of other potential good programming here.
Absolutely. We have great ideas coming in from the chat and the question and answer, and guarantee everybody that we're going to have many of these conversations addressed in future panels. The one definite theme that I'm hearing again and again is how grateful everybody is for the level of discourse that you've had over this past hour. It's one that they wish would be replicated on the school board level.
Certainly.
You should have seen us back in the day.
Chris, let me just make one comment. You know, having done some admissions work at Amherst where I went, and like, is sometimes not everybody's a good test taker.
Oh, yeah.
So those teacher recommendations could sometimes find that spark in that kid that the test may not. Now, they have to be proficient to a certain level, but some people just, they may have ADHD, they may have something else that on those tests they don't do well, but they've got the heart and they've got the intellect to do it. And so you want to be able to capture that as well.
That's just one little thing. The second look semifinalist proposal precisely addresses that issue. What happens if the student is not a good test taker? Well, that's the role of the principal who can advocate for this student. Thank you.
Well, David asks a question, and it was actually going to be my summary point at some point, but since he asked the question, he says, we're fortunate to have many smart and motivated students in Northern Virginia. Do the panel members believe there is enough demand to warrant a second or even third TJ? And I'll just, the point I would make, and that I was going to conclude with actually, was that the year that TJ was founded, it had a capacity of 1,600 students, and that capacity today is about 2,000 students. So it's an increase of about 25%. That same year it was founded, the Fairfax County Public Schools enrollment was 123,000, and today it's 188,000, an increase of 53%. So in essence, what we're doing is we're jiggering the numbers. We're playing with, fiddling around with rationing, really, because we have not been willing to expand the capacity. And I'm wondering whether anybody else would care to comment on that as well. I think the capacity is there. I remember that there were at least 2 proposals in the past. There was a discussion with some folks that were associated with Wolf Trap about creating a fine arts academy. And the response I had when I was on the school board was, well, if you do that, all the first chairs will go over there. So in essence, their argument against it was the second chairs would get a chance to be first chair. Wasn't a good argument for excellence. And there was another proposal that when you consider the wealth of information, wealth of people in this area of the country that are involved with government, imagine a government and civics governor's school that taught kids how to think critically about government, how to get things passed. We could make Tom Davis principal, and every graduate there would get elected to Congress at some point. I'll tell you, the disadvantage.
I'd have higher aspirations for them than that.
Let me ask each panelist if they'd like to make a 1-minute wrap up, because we did say we'd end at 8, and we're coming close on that.
Well, I'll just start. I mean, there's no reason you couldn't enlarge TJ or start a second or a school for the arts if the schools board had the willingness to do that. But traditionally, they haven't been very, very innovative about those kind of things. We have no charter schools here, even though the law has allowed it for years. Look at some of these other urban school systems are much more innovative, allowing for that. So, yeah, I think we have the capacity to this. It's what's the political will here?
Suresh?
So a couple of things. First of all, we are talking about education, and in terms of capacity, you are absolutely right. Perhaps with the 45-50% more people living in this community, we should have another TJ, perhaps, or perhaps even have a hybrid system where schools, other high schools, become hybrid governor schools, which is the case with the 12 other governor schools, where say 3/4 of the school is regular. There's about a quarter of the school that is set aside for a GT program, for example. But more importantly, I think today's call, I think there are a few things that we have to end with a call to action. The number one thing in there, I think in my mind, is that we have to impress on the school board that this cannot be a decision that they make in a vacuum. They have to open it up for public opinion, for a public dialogue, for a dialogue with industry, and they cannot make such an important decision without postponing, without having a discussion with the very people who have elected them in the first place. So I think it's an important takeaway that I wish we can all emphasize on. That is, postpone this decision until such time as everyone has had a chance to weigh in on the subject. Industry, the community, and every interested party. That's number one. Number two, let's have a whole new dialogue on how to create more social equity. I think every one of us agrees that we have to create more social equity. And social equity is not being denied because of capacity issues. It is being denied because the education system has failed them. The middle schools in these Section 3 areas has failed the students to prepare for TJ. So let us get into a dialogue on how we can create better opportunities for the students to be prepared to take on the challenge, a global challenge, if you will, for a high standards of STEM education. So I think these are the 2 or 3 key takeaways. And I hope there are some public school board members or others listening in that can weigh in on this. Perhaps the governor himself, I hope the governor has a say in this matter. But at the end of the day, I think we will have failed if those 2 key messages don't come across to the rest of the community.
Toussaint? Tyson?
You're on mute.
Hello?
I really hate to sound unoriginal, so I'll just say that I like Suresh's second point. It's all about spotting the kids and nurturing them in the underserved areas.
Norma, Margulies.
Yes. I would like to address directly the school board members. I believe that there is a crisis created by an illegal decision, and the Coalition for TJ has a good solution. The second look semifinalist proposal that addresses 2 things at the same time: increases the number of underrepresented minorities and the semifinalist pool, and at the same time preserves the integrity of the process. So I encourage them to take a second look. Thank you.
And Wenyuan Wu? Wenyuan?
Yes, I'm here. I just unmuted myself. Thank you. I just want to make a more general point that the fight for TJ in Northern Virginia must be fought in tandem with fights elsewhere. And I challenge the attendees and panelists here to rethink about the critical goals of our education system, and the definitions of diversity, merit, and disadvantages. How do we conceptualize these in connection with improving our educational quality as a whole? We also need bipartisan policy solutions to meaningfully reform K-12 public education and maintain academic standards at the same time. So we need to take politics out of educational policy making. And lastly, on behalf of my coalition, Californians for Equal Rights, I encourage every and each one of you to continue to engage in productive conversations like such and engage in this greater cause of equal rights for all. Thank you.
Thank you. And I wanted to give the last word to my favorite math teacher, Vern Williams, who, if he'd taught me, maybe I wouldn't be scrambling to try to figure out this screen. Vern?
Well, I do have one other comment, and that is, if you have an African-American Hispanic kid who has come up through Fairfax County, starting preschool, and somehow in 8th grade, very few, if any, of those students are ready for TJ. Ask yourself, what have we done for 8 years? Have we engaged in educational fads through these 8 years? Or have we really taught what I would consider a serious curriculum? So I'm a traditional teacher, proud of it, but I've received a lot of pushback for having been a traditional teacher. I never went along with fads that I knew would hurt my students. And if we just reach back and look back at the younger grades and really teach those students, then when they're in 8th grade, I don't think we would have this issue that we have now.
Thank you. Let me first apologize to everyone that we couldn't get questions of. I think we were genuinely overwhelmed with 235 participants on this Zoom call. And let me also thank each of the panelists. And Azra, I will turn it back over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you to such a dynamic, diverse, and intellectual group of panelists. We have recognized today that the battle at Thomas Jefferson High School for science and technology and the future of Northern Virginia and the Commonwealth of Virginia is part of a larger global and a national battle that we have to navigate with intellect, critical thinking, and wisdom. And so what we've enjoyed today is a panel of incredible speakers. Thank you for bringing us your wisdom and your intellect, your care for the community, and your passion about education. We're going to stay engaged. We invite you to go to coalitionfortj.net. The most important question that I also saw was, how do we get involved? So we have many ways there that you can get engaged: by writing to your board members, by writing to the governor of Virginia, to writing to the Secretary of Education. Please continue to join us, because we are families together that believe in the same values of the American dream and education. So thank you for joining us, and thank you all for your participation, and Chris for your incredible moderating of this panel. We're all in this together, and we're all doing this for the young people that we believe so deeply in and in their future. So thank you all so much.